And I never considered that work in and of itself could be a source of joy, satisfaction, contentment, reward, excitement in our lives. Because I was only looking at work as a paycheck, basically, as a means to make money. And what I realized is that the real riches in life never show up in your bank account anyway. It's found in the richness of relationships. It's found in the richness of experiences. It's found in the richness of the mission that we're on. It's found in the richness of the sense of community that we feel. And that's what I experienced at Chick-fil-A, is all these things that were so much more important than the size of my paycheck. But at age 21, the only thing I cared about was the size of my paycheck. And as it turns out, you know this, Terry, I've told you this before, but when I used to hire people at Chick-fil-A, I would tell them, if the least important thing you ever get from Chick-fil-A is your paycheck, I will have done my job well. But if the most important thing you ever get from Chick-fil-A is your paycheck, I've been a lousy leader.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Culture-neer podcast. I'm your host, Terry Gwaltney, and our guest today is the former vice president of marketing at Chick-fil-A, where he spent 37 years. He's co-author of the book Remarkable, co-founder of Rome, which is a shared workplace company, and just an all-around serial entrepreneur. David, welcome to the show.
Terry, what a pleasure it is to get to be on the show with you. You and I go back for a couple of years now, and it's an honor to meet in such a formal setting like this because we've had so many great informal conversations.
Yeah, and I always leave those conversations, inspired. And so that's the goal for today. Our audience is going to be made up of either aspiring business leaders or CEOs and entrepreneurs that are just trying to figure out how do I make this worth it? Because there's so much more to this than just making a living. And hopefully we're going to be able to, I know we will today. You're going to drop some huge nuggets. I'd like the audience to know a little bit about David, the individual, before we get just into your remarkable career as a purpose-driven leader, if that's okay with you.
Sure, of course.
And I remember just, we were talking about this a little bit offset, but a few months ago we were together at an event that was hosted at Chick-fil-A, and you had just spoke and sat down at the table, and we were talking. And the last two times I've heard you speak, I always walk away amazed because you tear up. You spent a huge chunk of your life, obviously, at Chick-fil-A, but you've been retired from there now for several years. But when you talk about it, it's the passion is still there, the authenticity. It's not just a speech you're doing. It's not just a talk you're getting paid to do. And I remember when we were having that discussion, I was telling you that, and you said, yeah, this place changed my life. And I'd like us to pick up that conversation right there. And I'd like you to tell the audience kind of what you were telling me, because you shared with me the impact and how that changed the trajectory of your life. And I just got to believe there's people that are listening today that they need to hear and understand what a huge opportunity and responsibility that they have leading their organization for the people that are maybe sitting across the desk from them, or they're out on the floor, or they're in maybe one of their service trucks, or whatever the case might be. Would you mind just kind of picking up that conversation and just telling us a little bit about that?
Sure, I'd be thrilled to, Terry. And I think it may help if I go one step further back in answering your question, because you'll be glad to know that at age 21, I had all of life figured out. And that's really where the story begins.
Oh, boy.
I was at University of Georgia at the time, and I had this great plan for my life. At that time, if you had asked me as a 21-year-old, the most remarkable plan I could think of was to graduate from college, make as much money as I could, as fast as I could, to retire as early as I could. And I had set my goal to retire by age 35. I just thought, if I can just be retired by age 35, how could life get any better than that? That's the best I had as a 21-year-old. And fortunately, I went to work for a guy named Truett Cathy at an organization called Chick-fil-A, and Truett was so much wiser than I was. I was pretty good academically. I'd done really well in college academically, but so from a knowledge standpoint and academic standpoint, but I didn't have a lot of wisdom. And I tell people, instead of finding the job I could retire from early, I found something I'll now call 1,000 times better. I found the job I wouldn't want to retire from. See, that thought
Mm.
had never crossed my mind, that there could be a job you wouldn't want to retire from, or even should be a job you wouldn't want to retire. At that time, I thought the whole point of work was to stop doing it. And I'd never considered, that work and a company could be so much more in life. And that's what I got exposed to at Chick-fil-A, because not only did it make a difference in my life, but from a professional standpoint, it made a maybe even bigger impact on me personally. And I never considered that work could do that for you, or a company could do that for you. It's almost like I gotta begrudgingly go to work so that I can really do everything important in life. And instead I found you could do a lot of important things right through the work itself. And I never considered that work in and of itself could be a source of joy, satisfaction, contentment, reward, excitement in our lives. Because I was only looking at work as a paycheck, basically, as a means to make money.
Mm.
And what I realized is that the real riches in life never show up in your bank account anyway. It's found in the richness of relationships. It's found in the richness of experiences. It's found in the richness of the mission that we're on. It's found in the richness of the sense of community that we feel. And that's what I experienced at Chick-fil-A, is all these things that were so much more important than the size of my paycheck. But at age 21, the only thing I cared about was the size of my paycheck. And as it turns out, you know this, Terry, I've told you this before, but when I used to hire people at Chick-fil-A, I would tell them, if the least important thing you ever get from Chick-fil-A is your paycheck, I will have done my job well.
Mm.
But if the most important thing you ever get from Chick-fil-A is your paycheck, I've been a lousy leader. Because it really, as it turns out, what was really valuable to me at Chick-fil-A was everything beyond the paycheck that I got. And Truett used to say that he used to, and this is kind of going back to our conversation we had, that he said there are 3 M's in life that you have to decide: your mate, your master, and your mission. And he said those are the 3 biggest and most important decisions we'll make in life: our mate, our master, our mission. And I made all 3 of those through the prism of Chick-fil-A and Truett Cathy and all that. He helped me make wise decisions in all 3 of those areas, where I was probably destined to not make wise decisions in those had I not had the good fortune, of going to work for him and for Chick-fil-A.
When I hear somebody like you talk about the impact somebody else had on their life, man, I hope there's a way that we can inspire people listening today to realize that, when I'm gone, hopefully there's going to be a line of people coming to my funeral, and it's because of the impact, that we were able to make on their lives. So I'm so moved by that when I hear you talk. For a guy that is retired, you sound like you're awful busy.
Well, my wife would tell you, Terry, that I'm failing retirement.
Well, at least you act like you're having a good time at it.
'Cause I have 7 different businesses I'm involved with actively right now, and having the time of my life. I'm having a ball. And it's funny,
Wow.
it sounds weird to a lot of people, because for somebody like me at age 21 that thought the purpose of work was to stop doing it, and that the real goal in life is to how quick can you stop working? What Truett taught me, said, if you love what you do, you'll never work another day in your life. And so I never considered that work could be a source of joy and satisfaction, like we talked about earlier. And I
Mm.
remember going into his office, Terry, when he was in his 80s. And I'd say, Truett, man, what are you still doing here? Your 401k is fully funded. And why are you still here? And he said, David, why would I stop doing something I love this much? See, I think that's what most of us are missing, is
Yeah.
that we assume work has to be a burden. We don't consider that work could be a source of joy, and work could be a source of satisfaction and mission, and that the real riches in life actually could exist in the workplace and not just outside of the workplace. It's just most people don't experience it that way, because I think most businesses are started with the wrong premise. And maybe that's a good place to go next with
Mm.
this. I think most people start businesses because they see business as a get rich scheme. I'm going to start a business so I can get rich. And I'm not casting aspersions, Terry. That was me at age 21. I've already told you at age 21, the whole purpose of my business career was going to be to get rich. And I thought that's what business was all about, that business was a get rich scheme. But the problem with business as a get rich scheme is that it almost implies that I'm going to get rich at the expense of other people. I'm going to enrich my life at the expense of others. And it could be, I'm going to enrich my life at the expense of my employees. I'm going to enrich my life at the expense of my customers. I'm going to enrich my life at the expense of my suppliers. I'm going to enrich my life at the expense of the community. And when you put it that way, it doesn't sound near as good. It's like a self-enrichment scheme at the expense of everyone else. But what Truett modeled for me, and why I get so excited about my time at Chick-fil-A and why it had such an impact, is he modeled something I'd never thought existed and couldn't even conceive of existing. He modeled business as a be rich scheme.
Mm.
And it sounds almost identical. Get rich, being rich, isn't it the same thing? But they're polar opposites. Because business as a be rich scheme asks the question, how can I be rich toward the people involved with this bit? How can I be rich toward my team, my staff, my employees? How can I be rich toward my customers? How can I be rich toward my suppliers? That's one that really trips people up because most people see their suppliers as a source of additional profitability, by trying to squeeze out a little more profit from them. And we always viewed it quite differently than that at Chick-fil-A. And then how can I be rich toward the community I serve? And business as a be rich scheme is an exciting thing to do. And it's a great way to spend your life. And it's a great mission to be on because you're using business as a chance to enrich others instead of just yourself. And I think that's where a lot of the real riches in life come anyway, is when we're in the process of enriching others. We've all heard it's better to give than to receive. And when you approach business with that mentality, that my business is going to be my opportunity to be rich toward other people, it's amazing what a difference that mindset makes in terms of your enjoyment, satisfaction, and desire to keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, your whole perspective changes, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
So, talk to us a little bit about who took this journey with you. You said mate, money, and mission. That's what Truett helped
Yeah.
you see through the prism while you were there. How long you been married?
I've been married now for 37 years.
Wow. Wow. Kids, I'm assuming?
Yes, we've got 3 kids. One who just turned 30, 32, 30, and 25.
Wow. Any grandkids yet?
We do. We have 3 grandkids, all from our oldest child, who's our daughter, Amanda. She's got three kids. And our middle son, Nick, is about to get married in December.
Wow. Well, life gets interesting when you get grandkids. So
Yep.
it's a similar path. I have 3 kids, been married 38 years, but I have 6 grandchildren.
Oh, wow.
So life is constantly busy. Who influenced you the most, David, as you were growing up?
That's a good question because it'd be hard for me to single out. It's almost like at different points in time, different people had more impact. That might be an easier way. Like I can go all the way back to 7th grade. I had a history teacher in elementary. At that time, they didn't have middle school. So 7th grade was your final year in elementary school. And I had always viewed myself as a mediocre student. At that time, all the classes were A, B, and C. If you were in the A class, you were the smart kids. C class, you're kind of the slow. B was kind of in the middle. I was always in the B classes. And that year, I got a history award from my history teacher. And it's the first time ever in my life, Terry, that I remember standing out at something. I was not good at athletics but for whatever reason, she gave me that History Excellence Award. And it's the first time I remember thinking I can be excellent at something. I can stand out at something. And that then kind of, up until that time, I'd always been in the B grade. I moved to high school and all of a sudden I started making better grades across the the spectrum. And, and then all of a sudden went to college. And in college, I had a internship with Six Flags Over Georgia with a gentleman named Dave Kaplan. It's kind of an odd story the way that worked out, because I went to Wake Forest for my first couple of years. I thought I wanted to be an attorney because my dad was an attorney. My older brother was studying to be an attorney. I thought that's what I wanted to do. But it turns out it was probably more about, following in my dad's footsteps than really isolating what I was good at. And so my freshman year at Wake Forest, I got a call from Six Flags that Dave Kaplan called me and said, hey, he had just taken a job at Six Flags and had gotten my name as somebody who might be a good intern in the marketing department. And I'm like, well, that's odd. I feel like I'm going to law school and I wasn't that interested in a marketing department internship, but he talked me into coming to interview with him when I came home from school over Christmas break. And he was just an amazing guy. And I just kind of fell in love with him and the opportunity, and I decided to try it. And that summer I fell in love with marketing. And that had such a huge impact, because up until that time, I would have told you I'm going to law school, which would have been a terrible idea for me. As it turns out, I was picturing law school as the attorneys you see on TV arguing things in court. The reality of it is 98% of the time you're just reading and writing, which I was not that good at either of those. And so anyway, I fell so much in love with marketing, I decided to change majors, and that forced me to change schools. I ended up transferring to University of Georgia to get in the business school because they had a marketing major there. And as a result of that, I met a guy named Woody Falk. He was one of my fraternity brothers who introduced me to Truett Cathy. And I met Truett when I was a junior. He kind of recruited me my senior year. And, and so all of that turned out to be, kind of the dominoes that led me to Chick-fil-A. But Dave Kaplan was a huge influence in my life. And I'll share with you this story because I think this could be helpful to the people on your podcast. As I told you at age 21, I had one question for any potential employer: how much are you going to pay me? That was the sum total of the questions I would think to ask. And so unfortunately or fortunately, I'd done really well in college. I'd done really well academically. I'd done really well extracurricularly. I was one of those kids on Friday night while everyone else is out partying, I'm studying or I'm leading organizations. And that, so I'd worked hard, and I felt like college graduation was my chance to cash in on all these extra sacrifices I had made that no one else was making. I'm kind of embarrassed to tell you now, I felt like in some ways that the world owed me a great job because I've made all these extra I've paid prices no one else has paid. Now's my chance to cash in on them when I graduate from college. And sure enough, I had some amazing offers coming out of undergrad. But the lowest offer I had by 75% less than my highest offer, was from Chick-fil-A. And for some reason, I was struggling with it, Tara. I can't imagine why I would, because again, if your goal is to make as much money as you can fast as you can, then you just take the job that's paying the most. But I was struggling with it, and I called Dave Kaplan and I explained it to him. And he said, Salyers, he said, I want to come visit you. So he said, we're not going to talk about this on the phone. I'm going to come visit you. So he drove all the way to Athens, Georgia. And I'll never forget, it was like it was yesterday. We're sitting in a parking lot near the football stadium. And we had this he basically sat me down and told me this. He said, Salyers, he said, the last thing you need to worry about coming out of college is how much money you make. He said, you need to find 4 things. He said, if you'll find these 4 things, money will never be your problem. So he's got my attention now, because the only thing I was thinking about was money. And now he's got 4 things, beyond that. So he said, first, he said, you need to put yourself under a leader that you want your life to look more like. He said, the leader you put yourself under is a picture of the future you. Do you like that picture?
Oh, that's good.
I had not considered that at all. I was ignoring the leader. It's like, show me the money. So I'd not considered the leader. And I'm going to give you kind of the Truett version. Later, I learned all the Truett version. I hadn't worked for Truett yet, but let me give you the Truett version of what Dave told me, because I kind of have a Truettism for each of the things Dave told me. So Dave told me, put yourself under a leader that you want your life to look more like, because the leader is a picture of the future you. Truett would have said it this way. He said, we become like those we surround ourselves with, for better or worse. So he said, true. Look around The people you're going to be working with, that's a picture of the future you. Do you like that picture? And I thought that's super important. That's super wise. And that's so telling, especially like when we get to the other side of it, when you're hiring people. Are you hiring people you want your life to look more like, So we can get to that in a minute. He said the second thing, he said, David, the first thing you're going to get asked in a social setting when you're outside of work is, who do you work for? Where do you work? He said, are you going to be proud of the answer to that question? Hadn't thought about that. It was like, how much money am I going to? I hadn't thought about it. Am I going to be proud of the person that I work for or the organization that I work for? Truett would have said it this way, and he lived his whole life this way by Proverbs 22:1. A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches. Truett was much more intentional. I never heard him talk about great riches ever, even though he may be the single richest man I'll ever personally know, that close. But he often talked about his good name and the good name of Chick-fil-A. That's what he cared about. And if those two were ever in conflict, if there was ever a conflict between preserving his good name or Chick-fil-A's good name, and it's going to cost us something financially, it didn't take him a nanosecond to figure that out. He would always go for the good name. So put yourself under a leader or surround yourself with people that you want your life to look more like. He said second, go to work for somebody who has a good name, a brand that has a good name that you'd be proud to work for. He said third, he said, you're uniquely gifted. God put us all on the face of this earth with some unique talents and giftedness. Is the job that you're signing up for going to leverage that unique giftedness? Put another way, a lot of us have read the book Strength Finders. Basically, that book challenges us to think in terms of working out of our strengths and not working on our weaknesses. And so he basically was challenging me, is the nature of the work going to put you in a position to leverage your strengths? Hadn't thought about that. It's like, again, the only question I had was, tell me how much you're going to pay me. And here's the problem, Terry, for a lot of people. A lot of people are smart enough, they're driven enough, that they can be good at things they're not good at just because they set their mind to it. It's like, I'm smart enough, I'm driven enough, so I'm going to become good at something. But just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. Because that kind of gets to the fourth thing, which is passion. He said, find a job you'd be passionate about doing. And as he used the word passion, as I use it now, I think about it in two dimensions. One is the work that I'm doing energizing me? In other words, is it charging my battery or draining my battery? Because if work becomes a source of charging our battery all day long, the implications are vast, which I'll get into in a minute. But if by contrast, it's draining us by what we do at work, those implications are really powerful too. So for instance, if my work is charging my battery all day, one of the things I loved about Truett and the Cathy family and the Chick-fil-A organization, they wanted me to be successful in all aspects of my life, not just work. So if what I'm doing at work is charging my battery, what kind of spouse shows up at the end of the day? What kind of father shows up? If you've got kids, what kind of, community citizen shows up? See, if your battery's been charged all day, you go home with tons of energy to do the really important things in life. But if by contrast, your battery's been drained all day, what kind of spouse shows up? What kind of, father shows up? What kind of community citizen shows up? You kind of have to go home at night or on the weekends just to veg out in order to recuperate, to go back to work and drain yourself again the next week. But if your battery's being charged by what you did all day at work, it changes not only your work, but it changes your life in the important dimensions of life outside of work. And so the other dimension of passion that I think about, and this is a good way to identify it because I spent a lot of my career trying to help other people find these things and, find their passion, find their strengths. But another place that passion shows up is, what are the things that we're happy to sacrifice for? What are the things we're happy to sacrifice? Because if we're passionate about something, we will be happy to sacrifice for that. So many times work is viewed as not something you should be happy to sacrifice for. It's like a burden instead of something you're proud of and something that it's a mission you're happy to be on and all the rest. But it makes all the world of difference if your work becomes kind of part of your mission and therefore you're happy to sacrifice when needed for that work. And so, sacrifice, energy, those are the two dimensions that I would look at that form passion. So I'll just kind of recap. So he told me, find a job with a leader or a team you want your life to look more like, because you'll become like those you surround yourself with. Second, find a job where you be proud to tell people you work there. Truett's version, a good name. Find a company with a good name, a leader with a good name. Third, a job you're uniquely gifted to do. And fourth, a job you'd be passionate about doing. He said, if you can find those four things, money will never be your problem. It's like at that point, Terry, that the scales fell from my eyes. All of a sudden, I saw why I was struggling with the decision, because Chick-fil-A was all four of those things. None of the other jobs. You know, some of them may have only had one or two of those at most. Some of them had none of those. And so all of a sudden I said, you know what? I'm going to sacrifice yet again, which I laugh at now, but arrogantly I thought I'm going to have to sacrifice, because I'm going to make so little money that I had to live at home for 2 years in a day where no one lived at home with their parents. You were like the laughing stock. And I felt like I've been sacrificing my whole life. Now I got to sacrifice again. Best sacrifice I ever made was to, take that job and work through it, because I wasn't making enough money to move out of my parents' house at a time when, today it's not uncommon for people to live at home with their parents, but back then you were a big L loser. You might as well have tattooed an L on your forehead because you were a loser. But I felt like I was giving up short-term finances for long-term opportunity. And it turns out that's exactly what happened.
So I've heard part of your story on this before. Tell the audience, because you didn't necessarily take a pay cut, but at the same time, you could have made so much more money. And, everybody hears about Chick-fil-A now, and, it's this overnight success, but, overnight success that took decades to get there. But I know there was a big price that many of even the operators paid for several years. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Such a great question. I'm glad you asked that. People look at Chick-fil-A today and think, it's so easy for them and everything goes well. Well, for my first 10 years that I was there, Terry, at any point in time, 40% of our operators were unprofitable. And basically the way their income is all dependent on, they get half the net profit of their location every month. That's their stuff. So if they're unprofitable, they can't put food on the table. They can't pay their rent. And 40% of our operators were unprofitable for about 10 years, and in addition to that, for my first 10 years, 100% of the people I hired took a cut and pay to come.
Wow.
And that I had to learn how to hire people who were taking a cut and pay to come. But to your point, I hadn't technically taken a cut and pay, but realistically, I took a cut relative to what I could have made. And so I had to justify that in my own mind. So I had to become really good at helping other people go for the better long-term opportunity rather than the short-term reward. And but the flip side is, if there weren't 40% of the operators that were unprofitable, I may not have had a job. The whole reason they hired me, my job initially, when I get hired, there were two of us in the marketing department. You know this, but I'll tell your audience. Chick-fil-A's headquarters was a converted air freight warehouse when I went to work for them. 801 Virginia Avenue, had a tin roof, tin walls, small, only room for a handful of people. And they had run out of room in the warehouse, so they cut a hole through the wall, pulled up a mobile home. And my first office was in a mobile home attached to an air freight warehouse. That was the Chick-fil-A that I signed up for. And didn't look like a great start for someone who wanted to retire early. It turned out to be the perfect place to start because it kind of set up the long-term. And to your point, we used to call Chick-fil-A the overnight success story, 40 years in the making.
Wow.
And it's hard to imagine that, because you were just there recently, and it's a super successful people. It's 76-acre campus with, a dozen buildings, but that's not where it started. And I just feel so fortunate that I got to get a front row seat to see it start from its meager beginnings and see what it's now grown into. But you really learn the lessons that are important. I've told you this before. I'll tell your audience this. It's interesting. Truett Cathy grew up in poverty. He grew up in a place called Techwood Homes here in Atlanta. It was literally the very first federal housing project in the United States was Techwood Homes. It was down near where Georgia Tech is now, and they grew up in poverty. And his mom had a boarding home. They had to board people in their home, and that's where he got some of his cooking skills and that helping his mom. But he didn't have anything growing up. But it's funny because he used to talk about his childhood as the gift of poverty.
Mm.
That was always fascinating to me that he thought back on his childhood not as, the price he had to pay or something. It was the gift of poverty because he felt like he learned all the important lessons that helped him be successful later in life during that time period. And there's a sense in which I feel the same way. I feel like my first years at Chick-fil-A were what taught me the lessons that became super important to help make us successful, but then keep us successful down the road. And as hard-headed as I am, I'm not sure I could have learned them any other way than to live through that. And but it wasn't always easy. I remember, a couple years into it, I thought about quitting at Chick-fil-A because half the time when I would go visit operators, they would play me what I call the Chick-fil-A "Done Me Wrong" song. It's kind of like they can't make enough money to put food on the table and pay the rent, and I'm the reason because I'm representing the organization that's keeping them from being successful. But fortunately, my job was to help get that turned around and said, okay, you can't make it now, but let's get your sales up, let's get your profits up, and then you will be able to be successful. And we were able to do that, thank goodness, often enough where now I don't think there's a Chick-fil-A in the world that's unprofitable now.
Wow. You said so much there, but one of the things I think in the for-profit world, there's so much we can learn from the nonprofit world.
Yes.
You think about the army of people that are willing to come for a T-shirt and a donut to donate their time on a regular basis, not because of money, but because they believe in the vision and they're so aligned with the mission. And so I'd like to hear, in those years that were lean, you obviously were bought into the vision of where Chick-fil-A was going and the mission on how they were going to do it. How, as a leader, did you translate that to 100% of the people that you were hiring that were taking a pay cut to come on board? That could be a valuable nugget for our audience.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. There's a little story I tell. I've got a book out called Remarkable, and there's a little story that I tell in that book that I think makes the point that we're trying to make, and this kind of encapsulates your question. Terry, let's say, right now it's August in 2024, and if I were to send you down to, let's call it Savannah, Georgia, it is hot, it is humid, it might be 100 degrees with 100-degree humidity, and it is nasty. And if I sent you out there and said, Terry, I want you to stand in the hot Georgia sun in August, and I'm going to pay you $15 an hour or $20 an hour to fill sandbags. How excited are you about filling sandbags in the hot Georgia sun in the middle of August, 100% humidity, 100 degrees outside, $20 an hour, let's call it? Probably not very excited, right?
Not at all.
No, not at all. But Terry, if all I did was change the scenario and say, Terry, there is a hurricane coming through, and let's say that you grew up in Savannah. We need people to go fill sandbags to save the city. Now, what would that feel like?
Oh, yeah. I'm a part of something bigger than myself.
Bingo. Physically, the work hadn't changed at all. You're still filling sandbags in the hot Georgia sun, but in one scenario, $20 is not very appealing at all. And the other, I would do it for free to save the city, which taught me the lesson that it's not about the physical work. It's about the mission associated with it and the outcomes that you're trying to get to associated with that. And what I love about having worked for Chick-fil-A is there's a sense in which, fast food is not exactly a glamour industry. Fast food is right up there with garbage collecting in most people's minds. I've never heard anybody say, when I grow up, I hope I'll be qualified to work for a fast food restaurant. It's usually just the opposite. If I can't do anything else, I can always flip burgers for a living. Fast food is kind of that if I can't do anything else job, I can always get a job there. So what I love about the Chick-fil-A story is we managed to create that mission mindset in an industry that's so far from that. And so what that does, that encourages me that if a fast food company can become mission motivated like that, I think almost any business can. It's a matter of creating the context. And I think the greatest leaders create the greatest context, for what we're doing, why we're doing it, why it's important. Uh, and the other thing that was really interesting about Chick-fil-A is we always want to create a picture of a brighter future. So, regardless of where we sit today, what most people want is a brighter future. And so we were always talking about the future and what things were going to be like and working toward that and having realistic plans that we could accomplish. And we were always working toward a better future than the current present. And sometimes that picture of the better future is what sustained us through the challenging present.
Mm. It's so good. So good. I wanted to ask you this question. 20 years ago, probably one of my big leadership heroes was John Maxwell. Mm. And I had an opportunity for just me and him to go to lunch. Mm. And I thought about that lunch, and it was like, what am I going to ask him? I need something profound. What am I going to ask him? I got this one opportunity. And so when we sat down and we had lunch, I asked him, I said, John, if you could do one thing different, what would you do? And at that point, I'm guessing he was late 50s, about my age now. I said, what would you do? What would be one thing you'd do different? And he said, I'd begin building my team earlier. Mm. Now, granted, the average tenure of his team member at that time had been with him for 21 years. And I thought that answer was fascinating. Mm. And then probably the thing that, when we were looking for inspiration for our company, we looked outside of our industry. And so we knew we wanted to do things different. There was a certain level of excellence, a certain level of customer service, how we wanted to serve people. And so, we looked to Ritz-Carlton, we looked to Nordstrom, and we looked to Chick-fil-A. And one of the things that was so impressive to me is that after Truett died, I started hearing these names pop up of people that were writing books. And you were one of those, and your book, Remarkable. If somebody in the audience hasn't read that yet, I encourage you to get it. But you and Deanne Turner and Steve, all had been there almost 4 decades. Mm. And so tell the rest of us, what's the key to keeping a team together long term? Because you lived it, you experienced it, and I think in large part, that's why Chick-fil-A obviously is having the success that they've had today. When you got that momentum going, it just kept going. It took a long time, but you start pushing the train, you get it moving, you don't slow down. So could you speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah. Let me start at maybe an odd place to start to answer your question, but I think it's a good place to start. There's a company called Gallup that we're all familiar with. A lot of us have heard Gallup polls and stuff, but they do a lot of work on employee engagement. And they have a survey that a lot of companies employ. Chick-fil-A employed it for a while. I'm trying to remember exactly how many questions. It's like 12 or 13 questions. They're not a lot of questions, but just by answering these 12 or 13, 14 questions, however many it is, it gives you tremendous insight into the level of engagement that your employees have. And there was one question that struck a lot of people as strange. In fact, I literally, I got to be careful. I know of a couple companies that took that question off of the survey because they felt like it had nothing to do with business success and why would we have it. And I've always found that one question to be the most controversial. But the funny part about it is, Terry, if you talk to the Gallup people, that one question is the single most predictive question of customer engagement, but it's controversial. So the question was this: I have a best friend at work. Not my only friend is at work but I have a best friend at work. And there were people that I've talked to in business say, I don't care whether you have in fact, I'd rather you not have a best friend at work because I need you working. It's kind of like I need your nose down to the grindstone, that kind of thing. But it turns out having a best friend at work is one of the secret ingredients to not only customer engagement, but employee engagement and longevity of employees. So looking back on it now, a lot of my best friends were the people I worked with. And if you're working with your best friends, and it didn't like start out that way, but we had great experiences together. We had accomplishments together. We worked as a team. We overcame challenges and circumstances. We did life together. When somebody would get married or have a baby, or we do wedding showers and baby showers and birthday parties. We're kind of doing life together. Now, for some employers, they would think, I don't care about all that. In fact, all that seems like a distraction from what I'm paying people to do. But it turns out that if you work around those kind of people, your motivation to show up at work is a whole lot more. Your ability to get work done is a whole lot more. Your ability to overcome challenges is a whole lot more. And the rewards you get from work are a whole lot more. So I'll give you an example. Tomorrow night, I'm going to a Braves game. I'm 7 years removed from full-time Chick-fil-A work. Guess who I'm going with? Some folks from Chick-fil-A that I used to work with. Because even though we don't get a paycheck together anymore, that was never what I valued about them anyway. I valued the richness of relationship that we had and the richness of community that we had and the richness of experiences that we had together, all those kind of things. So I think a thing that a lot of people miss, and it's kind of counterintuitive, because I can see the argument why an employer would say, I don't want you to have a best friend at work. I don't want you doing all these social things at work. But the reality is we all need it. I think we were designed for community. We were designed for relationships. And if you think about it, if you're a prisoner, what's the best way to punish the worst prisoners in a prison? What do they do to them?
Yeah, put them in solitary confinement.
Put them in solitary. They isolate them from
Hmm.
everyone else. That's like the worst thing we can do to a human. And yet at work, we seem to think that's very acceptable, that we want people isolated from each other so they'll focus on their work. But counterintuitively, I feel like what you really want at work is a best friend. What you really want at work is great relationships. What you really want at work is people who are doing life together. And if that happens, you can have a 97% retention rate, which is what Chick-fil-A had and I think they still do. The entire time I was with Chick-fil-A, 97% retention rate of our corporate staff and our operators. Isn't that
Wow.
amazing? In a
Yeah.
fast food business, again, it's not a glamour tech company or curing cancer or whatever. This fast food business, and yet there was that sense of camaraderie, that sense of community, and I think ultimately those were the rewards that went beyond the paycheck. The fact you had all that was what made what made work worth it.
Mm. Yeah, I think those are the hidden gems of culture that so many people don't understand. We talk to people all the time, and it's like you talk about culture, and once they try to wrap their head around what it really is, then they just begin to make excuses.
Yeah.
When we get to a certain point, then we're going to work on our culture. Right now I got to deal with the IRS, and I have to deal with payroll and taxes and the troubled employees. But I mean, wouldn't you agree that the culture is the foundation of everything
100%.
that we're building on? And
100%.
and so for those that didn't figure that out in the beginning, and now they're going back, and it's like, I need to fix this thing. What kind of advice would you give to those that are dealing with some resistance to cultural change within their organization?
Mm. That's one of the toughest things is to retrofit a
Mm-hmm.
culture. I had the advantage that, we kind of built it from the ground up. We started focusing on it even when we were in the converted air freight warehouse. So in some ways, I'm not an expert on, re-engineering a culture because my experience was building it from the ground up. And honestly, most of my experience post Chick-fil-A, that's what I'm doing. I'm building the culture first, and that allows us to weather all the storms of business. But I do have a couple of businesses I'm involved with that we're having to kind of re-engineer the culture. And so a couple keys to it. I can think of one. I'll give you one example. I'm on a bank board. When I started with this particular bank, we were a $5 billion business. That was 7 years ago. We just announced our latest acquisition. We're about to be a $65 billion bank. So we've grown from 5 billion to 65 billion in 7 years.
Wow.
And So culture's been a big issue with that kind of growth. But one of the things that happened not too long ago is we had a merger of equals. And a merger of equals is a really challenging situation because it's kind of like you walk into a meeting, and if it's a merger of equals, it's like, well, who's running things? This is two equal organizations, and so we had to rebuild a culture where there was a strong culture in the other bank, there was a strong culture in our bank, and we needed to merge those two cultures. And they were different. There were some differences. There were a lot of
Mm.
similarities, which is one of the reasons we wanted to merge, but there were some differences. And so basically, the way we navigated that is we said we want to get a picture of our culture on one page. And we started working toward that. And we took some of the elements of that were really important to the culture of the other bank. We took some of the elements that were really important to our bank that we were, and then we created some new elements between the two banks. And that creating of the new elements was one of the ways that we were able to, people support what they helped to create. So instead of fighting over whose culture was better, we kind of just absorbed some of it, but then we created something new together and we're able to meld it all together. But I think getting the culture down to like a crystal clear picture of a desirable future, which is what this one page was, and that
Mm.
people saw things. And it's funny because the banking business is very much a commodity business, as you know. Everybody's money looks the same. And so it can very much become a commodity business. But this particular, we call it the cultural cornerstones, is what this one sheet of paper is. Um, it has become our single greatest asset in recruiting new people. We've been able to recruit people from much bigger banks who, when we showed them, here's the picture of the bank we're trying to build, they'd say, that's what I've been missing in my current job. That's what I
Mm.
want. That's what I desire. And they see on this sheet of paper what they desire, and they leave, in some cases, well, many cases, bigger banks, maybe even being paid more because they see something more appealing than that in what we're trying to build.
That right there, I think, sums up the importance of culture.
Yes.
In some ways, it can seem like it's intangible, but yet there's really no way to put a value on it. But it's because it's invaluable.
Yes.
Uh,
And,
that's
and and
incredible.
a great culture should be like a magnet to attract the right people. So if a lot of people, the reason that culture is not important, they don't have a good one or they don't have a strong enough one to attract anybody. So it looks like this commodity kind of vanilla issue. Well, maybe that's because you don't have a strong enough culture, but great cultures will attract great people.
Mm, that's so good. Can you talk? And we're going to have to land this plane. We're going to run out of time before we run out of topic. But
Yes, sir.
um, can you talk to us about the importance of empathy in leadership and its effect on the culture of an organization?
Mm, such a good question. When I think about empathy, the greatest leaders I know, like if you were to ask me, tell me about the greatest leaders I've ever worked for or ever been around, a common denominator would be that they put others first. And empathy many times, because I think we're born selfish. We don't want to admit it, but we are all born selfish. I never had to teach my kids. You never had to teach your kids how to be selfish, did you? Not
No.
once did we have a lesson. It's one of their first words that you'll ever hear out of a grandchild now and out of our child was mine, mine. They learn really early. It's mine, mine, mine. And so we kind of come into this life naturally selfish. I think we got to work at being unselfish. I've often talked to my kids about being unselfish and putting others first. I never had to teach them to be selfish or put themselves first. And I think at the root of great leadership is great empathy. And I think about, I'm sure you've read and we've all read Good to Great,
Hmm.
Jim Collins. And he has the level 5 leader. And for those of you not familiar with it, he goes through these different levels of leadership. But a level 5 leader, the difference between a level 4 and a level 5 is a level 4, you know, is still kind of doing a great job of leading the organization, but a level 5 uh, kind of uh, rises to a whole new level where they're more interested in creating the next generation of leaders and they're more interested in helping other people succeed. Maybe a simple way to say it, a level 4 leader has incredible success themselves, But a level 5 leader is one who's able to create other leaders who have success. And that's the greatest level of leadership. John Maxwell, you mentioned earlier, he talks a lot about this. That the greatest leaders don't attract followers.
Mm-hmm.
They develop other leaders. And I
Yeah.
think, going back to your question about empathy, I think what empathy ultimately is, are we just as interested in helping other people succeed as we naturally are in our own success? Because it's really hard to have empathy if you're not at that stage in your thinking and in your kind of psychological approach. And so, to me, the greatest leaders have the greatest empathy because they're the most interested in creating success for other people. And it turns out that, helping other people succeed actually is one of the greatest blessings. I remember a little quote I heard one time that maybe sums it up. It said, I spent my entire life praying to God, to bless me in different ways, only to find out that the greatest blessing in life is to be one.
Yeah, simple but profound. We could spend a whole podcast on servant style leadership, couldn't we?
Yes, sir.
What's one advice you'd leave with our listeners today on how they could start to make a positive impact on their organization's culture?
Such a good question. Here, I found sometimes, Terry, that the best way to get people to open up their minds is to exaggerate for effect. So I'm going to exaggerate, and I want people to know I'm exaggerating because I don't want them to dismiss this. But the point is, if we exaggerate, we may actually come to some good conclusions. Imagine that you had to ask everybody in your current organization, all future people, to take a cut and pay to come, or to take a cut and pay to stay. What would you have to offer beyond the size of a paycheck that would make that worth it? Because I think the minute we get beyond the size of paychecks as the reason to go to work or the reason to stay at work, that's where the magic happens. Because culture, in my mind, in some ways, is all about everything we offer a person beyond their paycheck that's valuable to them. So what do we have of value beyond a paycheck? Because if the only thing we have of value to offer people is the size of their paycheck, we ain't got much. We've got what I would call a commodity job, because a commodity, by definition, is something we buy based on price. And effectively, if the only thing you have to offer is the size of a paycheck, people are buying based on price. So I would challenge people, if you really want to create a strong culture, could you create a culture where the least important thing, the least valuable thing somebody gets from you is their paycheck? And if you could do that, you're well on your way to creating an incredible culture, and you're going to provide the true riches in life. And the true riches in life, as we said before, are never found in a paycheck anyway. So focus on the real riches.
That's such profound wisdom. There's this old adage that says price is only an issue in the absence of value. Yeah. And I was sitting there thinking when you were saying that, now within context, but salary is only an issue in the absence of value, if you think about it. It's not that you don't want to pay your people and you want to pay them well and reward them, but to your point, there's so much more value beyond that that impacts people's lives.
Here's the thing too, Terry, because of course people need to make a paycheck. I needed to make one. You need to make one. We all got to pay our bills. So please don't hear me. I don't want any of your audience thinking he doesn't care, how much that's not the point. The point is I want him to get the paycheck and all these things above and beyond the paycheck. It's a matter of and, not or, kind of, but many times we get blinded by the size of the paycheck, both on the giving end and the receiving end, and we miss almost the unlimited ability to create riches for people beyond that.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're the poster child for that as we started the show on where you started from, and now you've lived that out full circle. The name of the show itself, name of the book, is The Culture-neer, and it's a merging of the words of being a cultural pioneer. And so I would ask you, what, in your words, what would it mean to be a culture-neer?
There's a sense in which you want to be a pioneer, because that's kind of what I was at Chick-fil-A. We were in on the early, but I also love the fact, because when I saw that word, and I've got your book upstairs, I was thinking you're also an engineer. You've
Mm-hmm.
got to engineer a culture. And by engineering it, you got to structure it. You got to think through how everything fits together, and create a foundation and build on the foundation. And so I think of culture-neering both being a pioneer, but also being an engineer. And how am I going to engineer my culture? And engineers require blueprints, and then they got to actually build it and all that. So I think if we thought about it as kind of an engineer, it starts to bring to life what we may need to do in order to create it.
Yeah, and that's where your core values, your mission statement, your vision. How are you going to ask somebody to join a team if you can't tell them where you're going and how you're going to operate? So good.
It's interesting because creating that one piece of paper, Terry, didn't solve it. That was a good starting point, but now we're in the process of building it so that people feel it. And they say, and then when potential new employees talk to our existing employees, see that, say, yeah, we really live this out. And they can give you actual examples of how we're living it out. So just putting on a piece of paper is necessary, but not sufficient. What you really got to do is take it off that piece of paper and make it manifest in the lives of the people who work for the organization and interact with the organization.
That's where the real work begins.
Yes, sir.
Last question for you. How does David Salyers want to be remembered when your life is over here on the earth?
Gosh, that's such a good question. I hope in the end, that, Truett again taught me. I spent 37 years on the receiving end of what Chick-fil-A and Truett had to give. And it was incredible to be on the receiving end of that. But I've spent the last 7 years on the giving end. I told Truett, well, not Truett, I told Dan Cathy when I left Chick-fil-A, I said, my mission is not changing, but my mission field is expanding beyond Chick-fil-A. Because it'd be easy for me to sit here and collect the rewards from all that we built through these years, but I feel like it'd be much more powerful to go out and recreate for others the incredible opportunity that you created for me. And so of the 7 businesses I'm involved in, the kind of the common denominator, the thread that runs between them, is I'm recreating for other people the incredible business opportunity and personal opportunity that Truett and Chick-fil-A and the Cathy family created for me. So I'd hope at the end of the day that that's how I'd be remembered, that I recreated for others the incredible gift that was created for me by the time I had at Chick-fil-A.
Wow. And I believe you're doing exactly that. And so, folks, as you're listening today, if you've not read the book Remarkable that David wrote, I encourage you to do that. He has a course. If you'd like to be mentored more by him, he has a course called Spark. Great course. I think there's 12 lessons in there. 6 of them have to do on branding. 6 of them have to do on culture. From over almost 4 decades of his business experience, it's the kind of stuff that will shape and make you the kind of leader that's worth following, where you can leave an impact and really make a mark that can't be erased within your organizations. I encourage you to take advantage of those resources that are out there. David, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show today, just sharing your years of wisdom and experience. And every time you open, I can just sit back like a sponge and just soak it up and listen. And I appreciate you being with us today. I know there was a lot of choices you had, a lot of other places you could be, and spending this hour with us has been very important to us. We appreciate it.
It's been an honor, Terry, for sure.
Well, folks, remember, your culture is only as healthy as the leader. So do your job to be the healthy leader that only you can be. And we'll see you next time on the Culture-neer podcast. Terry Gwaltney from the Culture-neer podcast. Listen, I want to say thank you for listening to the podcast today. I also want to encourage you to help us get the message out to more people. If you could like, share, and review this content on wherever you consume it, if you go into YouTube or LinkedIn or just whatever your social media channels are, and you could even share it, that would be a big help to us here at the Culture-neer podcast. Also, if you'd like some more information, you can go to www.terrygwaltney.com, where we have updates. We also have more resources. We share articles there. And you also can find our new book there called The Culture-neer. Again, we want to thank you again for taking time just to listen to the podcast or view it on YouTube. It's our goal to spend 20 or 30 minutes each time we're together to help grow your culture to a point where your employees refuse to leave and your customers can't resist. This is Terry. We'll talk to you soon.